Welcome back, all you lovely people. I hope you had a nice quick break there. So let's get back into looking at some challenges for utilitarianism. As I mentioned in the last video, we're going to focus on what happens when you combine consequentialism with sum ranking. Again, we're looking at sum ranking either in the classical form or the vector form. Now, when these two ideas come together, I really do think we understand or come to see what utilitarianism actually means when it talks about the greater good.
The greater good.
Yeah, again, consequentialism, sum ranking. This is going to tell us what that means. Because recall that consequentialism says, let's put it up there, the overall goodness of outcomes is the only thing with intrinsic moral value. And recall, that has two parts. Consequentialism is telling us that, again, we're only focusing on the consequences or the outcome, the impact. That's all we care about. And also it's telling us that we care about those consequences or those outcomes for everyone involved or everyone affected. Right? Those are the two things we've been talking about with consequentialism. Now, recall, we can add to that sum ranking. And recall, no matter what you like about sum ranking, it's about the overall goodness of outcomes is represented by some kind of aggregate utility. Again, aggregate utility. We're just summing up the individual people, their individual pleasures, whether they're higher, lower, or just all the same, whatever version you like. But at the end, we're still summing it up. It's still a math problem. And that is what we start to see when utilitarians speak of the greater good.
The greater good.
And you're going to kill me, right? When they're speaking of it, they are talking about literally this greater good.
The greater good.
The summing up together of all the different people involved and looking at that outcome and trying to maximize or promote it in the greatest things possible. And so now I think we can get some by combining, again, those two, consequentialism, sum ranking. I think here's where we start getting some controversial outcomes. And we can use some examples like we see from James and Stuart Rachel's. They give us some good examples to highlight these things. So now the first example that they give, I'm going in a different order, by the way, but you'll get the sense. It's not that hard of a reading. The first example I want to talk about is the one about breaking a promise to a friend. Again, breaking the promise here, let's throw up a little table there. Breaking the promise is a slight annoyance to them, but breaking the promise will be even slightly better for you. So in this case, you just look at the table. I won't do it for you because I think it's pretty, you guys can have calculators now. You can do the math. It favors breaking the promise for a slight increase in overall good. But, you might say, yeah, okay, the math says to do that. Utilitarianism says to do that. But that seems kind of cold. You made it, it's okay to break a promise. If you're a good friend, maybe you should still just honor your promise to your buddy. And I'll give a more exciting example now. Suppose a presidential candidate says, I will never engage in torture. I promise, vote for me, right? And then they're elected president. And so part of their popularity was that they would never engage in torture. But then the new president uses torture to stop a terrorist attack. I think that all that could very well really happen, where they promise not to torture, but then they're presented with a tough case, and so they ordered that the suspect be tortured. And the math might be pretty clear that that's what should be done if you're a utilitarian. And the question should be, we the people who voted for him, should we be angry? Should we be upset? Of course, if you're a utilitarian, the math is obvious, as I've already said. But other people, non-utilitarians, might complain. They'd say, but you promised. A person is only as good as their word. And so even if breaking the promise was for the greater good, many people would be extremely uncomfortable with that. The idea is we sometimes make promises or we have other sorts of obligations and commitments that we must just keep, even if breaking it would be for that greater good.
The greater good.
I'm getting tired of that. So the needs of the many shouldn't outweigh other commitments like promises, especially promises. And so again, we're seeing that we ought to respect individual people. And one element of respect is to honor the promises you make to those people. If I promise you something, it's pretty disrespectful for me to break that promise, even if that might produce more overall good. Still seems, at least not an easy thing or not an obvious thing that I should be able to do. Whereas utilitarian, right? It's easy and obvious. Greater good?
The greater good.
Do it. Now for the second example. punishing an innocent person to prevent riots from happening. I hate this example. It's very racially charged, to say the least. So I'll just restate it in a more general term of like this: should we harm, maybe even kill, an innocent person to prevent the deaths of other people? This is like that example from The Dark Knight where the Joker makes this threat.
Why should I have all the fun? Let's give someone else a chance. If Coleman Reese isn't dead in 60 minutes, then I blow up a hospital.
Yeah, the Joker says, kill this one person or I'm going to blow up a hospital. So again, kill this one person and you can save many lives. And look, on paper, that might all make sense. After all, most of you guys, based on what I read from you that you guys wrote for me, most of you seem perfect. Actually, probably all of you, I think, were perfectly fine with pulling that lever and killing one person to save 5. And I guess that's just your utilitarian part of your brain that's just kicking in and telling you, yep, it's okay, pull that lever. Kill one, but save 5. Do the math. We've talked about that, and most of you seem to, probably I think all of you agreed. But for a large chunk of you, not all of you, but a huge chunk of you, it's clear that other things besides the numbers, besides the math, matter to you. After all, there were a ton of you who absolutely did not want to push the large man onto the tracks to save those 5 lives again. So again, the math was the same, but you were no longer utilitarians because it seemed clearly that something else mattered to you than besides the overall good of the action. In any case, what I've mentioned is one thing that utilitarians seem to ignore is that we often want to give people what they deserve. Now, it's okay to punish, maybe even execute a criminal in the name of the social good, but an innocent person doesn't deserve that. And so the idea of hanging or executing or killing an innocent person, even if it saves other lives, that doesn't seem right. Even when harming that person would save lives. Again, we're seeing now that the needs of the many shouldn't always outweigh the needs of the few, especially when this involves that innocent person who doesn't deserve anything bad. And so again, we're seeing once more this idea about what it means to respect an individual person. Because another element, one was just honoring your promises, but another element of what it means to respect someone is not to harm them, no matter what social utility or overall goodness might come from it. Again, we're resistant to doing that to innocent people because they don't deserve it. So that's a second thing. So now the third example that kind of comes up is this idea about this pervert who watches women undress. Now, the woman never finds out about it, so her happiness or pleasure isn't affected, but the pervert, of course, gets great pleasure from watching and seeing the woman naked. And so it seems now, even in this case, utilitarianism is okay because more pleasure has been produced. But of course, this is wrong. I don't know, whatever you want. Is it the woman has a right to privacy? That has been violated. Or maybe a woman has a right to control who gets to see her intimate, who's going to see her in intimate detail. Yeah, whatever. It seems that some basic fundamental right of this woman has been violated by that pervert, and it doesn't matter that she doesn't know about it. It happened, period. And so what we're seeing here now is that utilitarianism seems okay with violating individual rights, as long as that is done for the social, greater good.
The greater good.
Okay. Indeed, the previous example of hanging an innocent person, that also seems to violate a person's right, not to be harmed. I mean, an innocent person seems to have that right. And so yet again, we're seeing how the needs of the many shouldn't outweigh the needs of the few, now especially when it involves the rights of a minority. I mean, that's what we tend to think why we have rights. The rights isn't to promote everyone's good. The rights are often there to protect the vulnerable, the minority, those who are in danger and at risk. So it's not utilitarian at all, these rights. They're supposed to protect us from the utilitarian reasoning of sacrificing individuals for the greater good.
The greater good.
You should really watch that movie, by the way, because that's exactly what happens. That's why they say it. Anyway, it's Hot Fuzz if you don't know. Anyway, so again, another element of respecting a person is to respect their rights. So again, what we've seen is that if we combine consequentialism, only looking at the outcomes, and combine that with sum ranking, which is just mathematically summing up the happiness or pleasure of all the individuals involved, yeah, morality is now a math problem. And in all these examples, we're seeing how treating morality at math can cause some problems, by summing out, by summing up the individual parts to create this whole that can outweigh and overrule those individual people, especially if it's a minority. Because, this math is ignoring, in all those tables, I'll quickly just pop them up. There. Is that all of them? I hope so. If not, I missed a few. But in all those tables, right, they're ignoring things like it's ignoring our promises and other commitments if those aren't directly linked to pleasure and pain. The math ignores when people are innocent and whether they deserve what's done to them, if that doesn't connect to pleasure and pain. The math ignores what rights people may have if those rights don't affect pleasure and pain. But all these things, promises, commitments, rights, who deserves what, innocence, these seem very wrong. We shouldn't be missing these things. These seem something that morality absolutely needs to care about. If utilitarianism isn't doing it, oh my gosh, that is dangerous and scary and wrong. Yeah, because in short, we're seeing all these are trying to show us that the greater good, thank you, might be overruled with a concern for respecting individual people. And we respect individual people by keeping our promises to them. We respect people by not harming them when they're innocent. And we respect people by not violating their rights. And so what we're seeing here is that utilitarianism does not seem cool with respecting individuals. It's willing to sacrifice individuals for that, greater good. And I think with this, we're now ready to talk about that story of Omelos. But before we do that, let's take that moment to stretch our legs, relax our eyes. I know, this is exhausting for all of us. So let's take a moment, stretch, relax, take a few minutes, come back here, and then we'll talk about Ursula K. Le Guin's story about Omelos. See you back here in a moment.